Hey, how's your day been?
It's been a nightmare. The boss needs me to make a report about all these legislations and how they affect things like job adverts, person specifications, job descriptions, application forms, assessments, interview questions and selection criteria. But I don't know anything about any of the laws.
Oh, it's easy. Let me help. What are the legislations?
Equality Act 2010.
Okay, the Equality Act 2010 brings together a legal framework to protect the rights of individuals as well as ensure equal opportunities to individuals. The 8 main legalizations brought together are the Equal Pay Act, the Sex Discrimination Act, the Race Relation Act, the Disability Discrimination Act, the Employment Equality of Religious Belief, the Employment Equality of Sexual Orientation, the Employment Equality of Age, and the Equality Act 2006 Part 2.
Oh, I understand. How does this affect all of those things though?
Right, so, when somebody creates a job advert, they can discriminate against anybody for any reason. They need to allow people of different minorities the chance to fill out the application form and apply for the job they have listed, with a person specification. Those who are in charge of hiring need to judge the person by their qualifications rather than their ethnic backgrounds, sexual orientations, religious beliefs, or disability. A job description must be inviting for everyone. It shouldn't discourage anyone not to apply due to any of the reasons I mentioned earlier. It also shouldn't stereotype. For example, hairdressers who are hiring couldn't say that they only want females or homosexual males to apply. An application should have applicable answers for every minority. A business who are hiring can't subtly ward off minorities by excluding them from answers like gender, age, and ethnicity. This legislation also means that when an interviewer is asking questions, they should ask all candidates similar questions and offer them equal opportunities to talk and sell themselves for the job. With the selection criteria, businesses need to ensure they offer criteria that are achievable for every minority. For example, it's okay to make it a criteria to be qualified to be a bouncer, but it's not okay to state that you need to be male to apply for the job as a bouncer.
Oh, wicked. What about the national minimum wage legalization?
The national minimum wage requires all workers to be paid a minimum wage amount no matter what the size of the company they work for. Minimum wage varies with age and whether or not the worker is an apprentice. This can affect a job advert, as it might state that the job potential applicants would apply for would be paid at minimum wage. It also means that they can offer a job at less than the minimum wage for that age group. It could affect application forms and interview questions, as they might ask you for your current wage to see if it's higher than what they were planning on offering. It could also affect the selection criteria, as you couldn't state that, for example, you are only looking to hire qualified teachers for a job, but then say that you are only going to pay the minimum wage. I can't think of any ways that minimum wage would affect a person's specification, job description, or assessment unless it was for an apprentice, because then these documents would be aimed at a certain type of candidate, like a school or college leaver, and the criteria for each of these would indicate that.
Thanks. This is all really helpful. Now what about the Data Protection Act 1998?
The Data Protection Act is designed to protect personal data stored by businesses. It protects personal information like names, addresses, contact information, employment history, medical conditions, convictions, and credit history. This would affect an application form, because when filling out an application form you have to put in all of your personal details, and the businesses who then have this information will have to look after it properly and correctly. It will affect how they store all of the details they gather from interview questions as well. In fact, it will affect anything that helps them to learn information about you, like an assessment.
So, what about the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act?
The Rehabilitation of Offenders Act enables some criminal convictions to be ignored after a rehabilitation period. It's in place to ensure that people do not have a cross against their names for the rest of their life due to a relatively minor offense. This will affect a job advert and person specification, as it will mean that businesses can rule out some types of ex-convicts. For example, The person specification couldn't say looking for somebody with no prior convictions of any kind. It will affect an application form, as somebody who has had their slate wiped clean of any conviction will not have to state it in an application form. This will also affect interview questions, as the interviewer will not know about any prior convictions, meaning that they will not feel the need to ask any questions about it.
Oh, and lastly, Safeguarding of Vulnerable Groups Act 2004?
Okay, well, the Safeguarding of Vulnerable Groups Act is in place to protect vulnerable people such as children or adults with learning difficulties or disabilities. This act prevents unsuitable people from working with these vulnerable people. This would affect a job advert, description, and person specification, as they would all state that you need to be suitable to work with vulnerable persons. Also, they would state somewhere in the job advert that the company fully complies with all safeguarding legislation. It would also affect an application form, as the applicant would need to state or provide evidence to show that they are suitable to work with vulnerable groups, and in some cases would have to sign an agreement for further disclosure investigation. It would affect assessment, as the tests would assess how you would deal with different scenarios involving vulnerable people, and then the business would be able to see if the manner in which the applicant dealt with each scenario was appropriate. Interview questions would also be affected, as the interviewer would need to be certain that the applicant is suitable to work with vulnerable groups, so the questions will be targeted to ensure that an in-depth understanding of the personality of the candidate is achieved. It will also affect selection criteria, because in some cases you will need to be qualified to work with vulnerable people and have evidence, and there will probably be a need for an additional background check such as a CRB.
Thanks, you're the best. Thanks for all of your help. I owe you one.
That's okay. Right. I've got to get back to work now. See you late.
Bye.